Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young, licensed clinical social worker. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. This is episode 22, and in this episode, my good friend Laura Carr, who's a licensed marriage family therapist, interviews me. She asks me the questions that I usually ask my guests. This was a really fun episode to record, and I love the interaction between Laura and myself. She really has so much to offer, and she's someone who knows me very well, so I think she has a lot of insight and new things to ask me. We've recorded one other episode that's going to be airing shortly. I haven't figured out exactly when, and I would love to have Laura on regularly, so please get back to me about this episode and let me know your thoughts. I think Laura and I have a great synergy between us, and she just has some amazing insights. And so I think between the two of us, we really give a very good perspective. So let me know what you think about how this interview was and if you'd like to have Laura on as a regular guest. Some of the things that we talk about are, when did I get the idea for this podcast? What's the benefit of knowing that you're a highly sensitive person? My mission for this podcast, why did I start it? I talk about being loud and proud. Well, quiet and proud. Laura talks about her first impression when she heard the term highly sensitive person. I also talk about how my view of myself has changed since starting the podcast. Laura has this beautiful statement in here, and I just want to highlight it. She says, the power of being able to see ourselves authentically. I just think that's such a beautiful statement. I also talk about a new definition of play that really may be more suitable for our highly sensitive people based on what I believe our current definition of play is culturally. Laura asks me what I would want to know if I could go back and talk to my younger self about being a highly sensitive person. And I shared it, and she reflected it, and we couldn't remember what the third thing was. So what I would have wanted to know was that I was loved, that I'm okay, and that I'm enough. And I'm going to jump on at the end of the interview because I have some comments to say about that. Some stuff came up for me after we interviewed, which is pretty common. So it's kind of nice when I record an interview, if I wait a little bit of time to record this part that goes with the interview. I've usually had some reflecting to do, and we know I do a lot of reflecting. During the interview, when Laura asks me how I found out about being a highly sensitive person, I tell her I learned about being an introvert. What I didn't clarify is I'm a highly sensitive extrovert, and it's very possible that many of you that think that you're an introvert may be a highly sensitive extrovert. So I've attached a link to an article by Jacqueline Strickland that's called Introversion, Extroversion, and the Highly Sensitive Person. A lot of the information that's out there about introversion and extroversion doesn't take into account the highly sensitive person, and a lot of the memes that we see around introversion are really about highly sensitive people. So I really just want people to have that information so that they can be clear. The other thing is, I really make a point to not say emotionally reactive. I really like to say emotionally responsive because I think that highly sensitive people get a bad rap for being emotional and dramatic. And I really want to reframe our language so that we can talk about responding. We may have strong feelings, so we're emotionally responsive, but we're not emotionally reactive. If you're interested in if you'd like to see pictures of a lot of the things that go on either behind the scenes or things that I talk about, I have an Instagram account called Unapologetically Sensitive. And now, on to the show. Hello. Today we have something a little bit different. I'm here with my good friend Laura Carr, who's a licensed marriage family therapist. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself, and she's going to be interviewing me today. But what I want you to know is Laura and I were best friends back in the early 90s. She went to school in Europe and I flew over. We spent 3 weeks traveling through Europe together. When I got married, she was in my wedding. And then we had a falling out and we didn't talk for 20 years. Now, Laura lives 5 blocks away from me, and while we had this falling out, she moved into my neighborhood and has lived in my neighborhood for, 20 years now? Yeah. So we will be doing another episode to talk a little bit about what happened, how we did the repair work, but we just kind of want to give you a little bit of a tease. So here is Laura Carr.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. This is fun. I'm excited.
I know, me too.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Carr. I have many hats, but one of them being I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been licensed since 2001 and been practicing since 97. Very passionate about this field and the work. And 2012, I started a nonprofit called Center for Mindful Relationships. And my passion about offering counseling services to the San Diego community on a sliding scale. So we do counseling services for the San Diego community. We do it from a framework of compassion-based awareness therapy, which will be a whole nother episode, I'm sure. I'll talk Patricia into letting me talk about that someday. So I'm really excited today to be interviewing Patricia and talking with her about her podcast and how this came to be and what it's been like for her and what it's like now and what she envisions for it in the future.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
When did the idea of a podcast first kind of drop into your awareness for you?
Oh my gosh, 17 months before I launched. Mm-hmm. I bought a program for podcasting. I remember the day I was driving on Utah Street to drop my dog off at the groomer, and I called my husband and I said, I just spent a lot of money on a podcasting course. And then I started to cry. I said, if I fail and I don't do it, is it going to be okay? I was so afraid, and it felt like a big expense to spend on this course. And I just felt really fearful. And it's like I needed permission to fail. And then I sat on it for 17 months. I thought I was procrastinating. And I knew I wanted to do something about authenticity and vulnerability, but I really couldn't put my finger on it. And it wasn't until I went to a retreat for highly sensitive therapists in, I think it was July of 2018. And then it became crystal clear that I really knew so much more about being an HSP than I had given myself credit for. And from that point forward, I just came home. And even though I had purchased the course, I had never looked at it because I really hadn't, didn't know what to do with it. And from there, I just moved forward and things just fell right into place.
That's really fun. That's really exciting to know, to trust the process of creativity and wisdom, that whole process of it will happen when it's meant to happen.
Yes, and I think as HSPs, we beat ourselves up. We tend to need more time for transitions. Mm. And I think what happens is we tend to beat ourselves up while we're in that waiting process. And I think with creativity, it's almost like, the podcast baby needed 17 months to incubate. Mm. And it's not until it's done and looking back that I can see that I totally needed that amount of time. But in the process, I kept feeling like I was stalling. I was putting it off. I think in a lot of ways, I probably beat myself up. And it was one of those things like, is this another thing that I got excited about that I'm not going to follow through on? Which again, I think is kind of common for highly sensitive people.
It seems like a pretty common experience that happens, I think, for a lot of people, of getting excited about an idea. And then the process of procrastination or fear or whatever we want to call that gets in the way of being able to act on that. And so it's fun for me to hear that story because I haven't heard that story, because I feel like I've been able to be a witness to you processing, I need to start the podcast course. I need to start the podcast course. And just watching you go through the process and then to see where you're at with it now is just really thrilling.
Thanks. I think what's been exciting for me is I do finish things. It's not that I don't. And I have a history. I come up with great ideas, and I don't often have the skills or the tenacity to follow through on all the ideas that I come up with. So I do have this story in my head about you don't really follow through on things. And it's been so exciting to see this podcast. It's a total labor of love. I spend so much time. I mean, you and I talk daily. We'll talk about that later. But it's always like, this is what I need to do for the podcast. I'm editing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I love it. I've found my voice, and I feel like I found something I can really dig my teeth into. And so it's been very satisfying and esteeming to see that I found something that I'm passionate about, I'm putting energy into it, and I'm getting results, and it's really resonating with a lot of people. That makes my heart sing.
Yes. And what I've watched you do is we joke about this often, is about your attention to detail and your love of details and the things that you love about podcasting. And when I hear you talk about editing and all the love that you put into it would drive me bonkers. And so I'm in awe and admiration of just watching you do something you love and then having something really beautiful come out of it.
Oh, thank you. I want to tell a story about when we talked about doing the podcast together. Are you okay with that?
Yep.
So Laura and I had talked about doing the podcast together. Part of that is my fear that I wouldn't be able to have enough content on my own. And that was why I started an interview format, because I really felt like I don't have enough to say. My position has changed on that. And doing the 30-day podcasting challenge was the best thing I could have done, because I just had to come up with content for 30 days. And it gave me the freedom and the creativity to do whatever I wanted. And that's allowed me to do the bonus episodes, which are probably one of my favorite things to do. But Laura and I had talked about doing the podcast together, but I knew I would end up being the one that did the organizing and the editing. And I knew I'd get resentful if we did that and it just wouldn't work. And I was able to tell you that, and the type of relationship that we have, our relationship can handle that. I mean, how was that for you when I said that to you?
Not a problem at all, just because I feel like that I'm pretty good at being able to be aware of some of the qualities and strengths and challenges that I have. And it just named that exactly so. So it's almost a relief, right? To have it named and without any judgment. It's good self-care, right? So when you take good care of yourself by speaking what would be good for you, it actually also takes care of the relationship.
Yeah. I mean, we had that a little bit today just because you've been sick, and we've been trying to get together and record for forever. We recorded before I launched and we had some audio problems. I spent 6 hours editing the first episode. Oh my gosh. And then the audio quality was terrible and we had to check it. So we've been really trying to get back together to do this recording, and you've been sick. And so we set time aside today. And I said this morning on Marco Polo, which I'm still not getting money for, if you're not feeling well, I'd be totally disappointed, and you've got to take care of yourself. How was that for you hearing that?
It was great. It's one of those things, again, I wish we could almost package the skill set that we bring to our friendship to use as a template to teach people how to have good relationships.
Yeah.
So it's really great to be able to name things, own them, speak about them. I mean, we've had several of those happen. We don't have a name for the reunification or whatever we're calling that, getting back together. We don't have a term for that.
No, we don't. We just have it called the breakup.
So I want to talk with you about bringing back HSP. Do you identify as an HSP?
No. All right, we're done. I learned about introversion before I learned about being an HSP, and I totally identified as an introvert. And I have this little pet peeve. It's actually a really big pet peeve. What I learned after knowing that I was a highly sensitive person is a lot of what's been written about introversion overlaps the qualities of being a highly sensitive person. So the good news is that people are learning about the traits of being an HSP, but when I go on social media and I read about introversion, memes, and all these things, they're great, but they're really talking about highly sensitive people. 70% of highly sensitive people are introverts, so there definitely is an overlap there. But it's frustrating when I feel like I see a lot of attention being given to introversion where what they're really talking about is highly sensitive people. So I'm not even sure when I found out. It's funny, I'm in a Facebook group for highly sensitive therapists. I don't even know how I found out about it. It's not a very good story.
So it's been a journey.
It has been a journey.
Right. And what do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
Really, for me, it just doesn't matter. Culturally, we know that our culture does not like dependence. It doesn't like sensitivity. I think using sensory processing sensitivity is fine to use. It's interesting. Even today, someone reached out to me to want to be on the podcast. and we had a discussion about being a highly sensitive person. This person really had no clue what it was. And I really want people to know what a highly sensitive person is, to understand the traits. She's like, my therapist hasn't diagnosed me with it. I had to explain it's not a diagnosis. It occurs in too many people to be a diagnosis. There's nothing wrong with you. So doesn't matter to me what we call it. I just would love for people to know about the trait and to understand it, and to understand that it's research-based, and you can see differences in fMRIs. It's found in over 100 animal species. It's not just something that, we're making up.
What's the benefit of being able to know more about the quality or the characters traits of being an HSP?
Well, I think for me, it really normalized it. And, we've all heard the two. You're too sensitive. You're too needy. You think too much. You worry too much. You need to get thicker skin. You can't take a joke. You're no fun. You're too picky. I mean, we've all heard that. And I think we've internalized that. And then to see something where it's been researched and these are qualities and traits that run equally across men and women who are highly sensitive, it gives us a whole framework of how to rework it and to own it, which is why I have the title Unapologetically Sensitive. Yeah, I cry at stuff. Yeah, I have emotional responses to things. Yes, I feel things deeply. Yes, I've got sensory things, and loud noises and bright lights just don't work for me. And instead of feeling apologetic about it, I'm like loud and proud about it. Well, I'm quiet and proud about it, but I think when we know what it is and we don't feel like there's something wrong with us, that's a place where we can really turn it into an empowerment and see strength with it, which is really what my mission is, to have people understand and to see that being highly sensitive comes with so many gifts, and we create so much balance in the world. And yeah, we've got some challenges and things to work through, but everybody does.
Right. So being able to see it as a strength, which is what I love about your tagline of it's a superpower, right? That place of, can I tell a quick little story?
You bet.
So I don't even remember how many years ago it was, but I was on a retreat. When it came to my turn to talk, I started to cry, which I often do when I'm talking about deep things. And I apologized for crying. And the facilitator at the time said, don't apologize for that. You're in touch with your emotions. And she knew the profession I was in. And we joked. She's like, people pay thousands of dollars to get in touch with your emotions. You're already in touch with them. And so that reframe to begin helping empower, which is what, when we reconnected and you started talking about HSP, I allowed myself to hear it from your framework. It really was a beautiful shift for me in being able to see how it helped empower you, how it helped expand your appreciation for those qualities that were once shamed.
And what was your reaction the first time you heard?
I'm doing a big eye roll right now. Oh my God. Yeah, total eye roll. Because another episode, I hate labels. And there's a whole reason behind that, but that's not for today. But the really cool thing is once I started listening to you, it opened my eyes to how I could relate. And being able to see traits within myself and then traits within my partner and traits within my children. And it really brought a lot more skill set. There's got to be another word for strength there's another word I'm looking for that I can't find. Tools, right? To be able to use to assist me in my relationships with people I love and with myself.
Mm-hmm. So was your reaction, I just want to clarify for the listeners, was it because it was a label or because of the name of the label, or what was the eye roll about?
So let's see, I think it was twofold. I have judgment. There is judgment that comes up for me around labels, so that's my stuff completely. And there is, at a deeper level, there's also rejection of my own sensitivities that I carry. And so combine those two, and I think there was a rejection of that word, highly sensitive person, because of those inner stories of shame and insecurity around that. So it's easier to reject the label than it is to look at what those are.
Sure. Well, you did a great job, because I didn't even see the eye roll or know that you were having a reaction until we talked about it later.
I want to speak to that too, because the other piece of it was I consciously suspended judgment because other people have talked with me about that label, and I choose to voice my opinion about it rather than stay in conversation. So I chose to suspend it for the sake of the relationship and creating space rather than having an opinion and being a personality about it, which that's a skill set to bring into relationships. And who knows why I was willing to do it at that moment, but I wasn't, say, in other times in my life. And so I'm really grateful for that willingness to have restraint. And I wanted to support you, and I wanted you to feel supported. I feel like it was early in our reconnecting stage. And so it was a place, I think there was a lot of elements that helped me hold my tongue.
I really see that as being a gift of love. And I can imagine people thinking, well, you were just too afraid to say something, but I think this came from a totally different place of making a conscious choice to suspend judgment, at least externally. Like if you had internal judgment, you could have that, but to externally suspend judgment in order to support me and to find out more about what it meant for me, just because we were rebuilding our relationship after not talking or seeing each other for 20 years.
Completely. It's a place of this. That was not the time for opinions or a intellectual academic discourse about that. It was about reconnecting and getting to know one another. So,
yeah.
All right. Next question. How do you feel about being an HSP?
I love it.
As you grin.
I do. It's a superpower. And doing this podcast has also really helped me find my voice. I'm talking to more people about being a highly sensitive person, what other people find their strengths. And I think in having so much contact with other people, it's really helping me to see how much people know, how much people operate in the world with their sensitivity, how much they like it or don't like it. I feel really blessed that I've been able to create a lifestyle that really honors and nurtures my HSP needs. And I think that makes it a lot easier for me. I'm able to work from home. I'm able to set my hours. I worked in a hospital for 9 years. That was really not conducive to being an HSP. So for those reasons, I feel really blessed, but I just feel like I'm learning more and more about myself and embracing so many aspects that I don't think I was able to do before because it felt like they were shortcomings, and to feel like they're strengths just helps me to lean into them even more and appreciate them.
That's just really beautiful. I don't know if I can say it in words adequately, but one of the things that I so appreciate about how excited and passionate you get about highly sensitive qualities and the empowerment of it is it helps a person, helps me, but I've watched you. How you do it is it takes more responsibility for how you care for yourself and show up in the world versus someone using a label as a way to reinforce patterns and behaviors that don't work.
Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking about, my eyes are tearing up, because part of what has been just such a blessing in our relationship, because we use Marco Polo. If you don't know what it is, it's an app. We polo sometimes a handful of times a day. We talk almost every day. And there was a time when I wouldn't have wanted anybody to know that. I would have felt ashamed because my fear of somebody saying, you're being so dependent. And really, interdependence is so important. And our culture is so against anybody having any dependency needs. And I think that we could have healthy dependency needs. But because of the intimacy in our relationship, you hear pretty much anything that goes on with me. And I feel like you've also mirrored back so much love and honoring in the process that I go through that it just encourages me to even show up even more as myself. And so I feel like I have that place of like I'm at home with myself and I'm at home with you, and that I get such beautiful mirroring and respect back from you that it just kind of feeds that cycle of going deeper and being more authentic.
Yep, beautiful. So going back to the podcast, so we take walks often during the week. A lot of times we circle Dog Park. And so this question reminds me of the circling that we were doing and when you're brainstorming about the podcast. So why did you want to start this podcast?
I felt so alone, like a misfit for most of my life. And the more I talk to people, I think we all have that narrative. I don't care what it is. I mean, my other narrative is I was an overweight, pimply faced teenager in high school, and I just felt alone and sad and really wanted to connect. I do feel grateful that I have a very strong need to connect, and I always have. And I've always had at least one best friend, and I think that was the resiliency factor for me. But I know that we all have this, what I call it gremlins, that we feel like we're not okay, that we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're too whatever it is. And I really wanted to create a place where people have a sense of community and belonging. And the reason why I do the bonus episodes and why I talk so vulnerably is because I want people to see that it doesn't matter who you are. And I always feel like I know I have this thing about therapists, probably because I felt like, and I still see it, messages like, if you take this course, you will be happy. If you take this, you won't be depressed, lose your anxiety. I just don't think that that's true. I think that we can get tools to manage our symptoms. I think that we can live better lives. I think that we can be happier and more fulfilled. And being human means that things throw us and we get sad and we get mad. And that's part of being alive and human. And I don't see a lot of places where that process is modeled and where it's viewed as being strong. Usually vulnerability is seen as weakness. And I feel like I do vulnerability. I feel like I'm the poster child for vulnerability. And I really want to model that. And I want to change the narrative about having deep feelings and deep responses to things is a really healthy thing. And it can make us stronger in who we are, have more intimacy in our relationships, and kind of live deeper, more meaningful lives with more joy.
Yes. Before you started the podcast, we were looking at doing Facebook Lives, right? And we came up with the transparent therapist, #transparent-therapist.
Right.
I think that's one of the things I love, that when we reconnected, there were so many things we were both passionate about. And the things we were excited about, we could resonate about. And so there's the world of therapists were trained to early days be a blank slate, right? So therefore, don't have yourself show up in the room, don't have any issues. And there's this idea of you can't help someone if therefore you have things going on in your life, and you can't not have things.
Right.
So you can't actually show up authentically. So I love that we're at a time in our life where we can begin to break down those stigmas and stereotypes and start taking the risk and showing that therapists are real people. You can be healthy and strong and be vulnerable.
Yep. And then it's funny, I feel like I'm usually on the side that you are, so now I'm going to be on the other side. And depending on the population that you work with, if you're a therapist, how much self-disclosure is appropriate. You want to use self-disclosure appropriately. You don't ever want your clients taking care of you, but that's really not what we're talking about. And for the type of work that you and I both do, and with the type of people that we work with, showing up authentically is people that have some struggles in using that therapeutically in small doses in appropriate ways causes these amazing relationships and amazing transformations to happen in the therapy room.
Right. There's always going to be the side of what's appropriate. It's going to have corresponding when it's not appropriate. And we're talking about the places where it is appropriate, and to me, there's two separate things. There's showing up in the world and in your life, and then what you show in the therapy room. What we talk about out here in the podcast and in our lives and how we show up with friends and family and all of that, that stuff may or may not come into the therapy room, but we may share tidbits of it to demonstrate for a client. I still remember the one day that our therapist said to me, I don't know what it was about in our life, but she shared when she kicked in her teenage son's door. And in that moment, I was like, I can relate to this therapist. I can trust her, because I knew she knew what she was talking about. It wasn't like she was just trying to teach me something theoretical in a book that she'd read about and was just trying to get me to change. She knew what it was like to struggle with anger.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I mean, I just always got the feeling like I wasn't doing therapy right because I still struggled and I still had problems. And it felt like it wasn't an overt message, but the message seemed to be, if you go to therapy, then it fixes you and you don't have problems. And I couldn't understand why I still had problems. And yeah, do you have that experience?
The blessing about having our own agency is that I feel like we've been able to create an environment where we get to be real. So at our agency, we train therapists in their first year of therapy. And so I feel really blessed that we've created an environment that aren't in a lot of places. And we get that feedback constantly we talk about, I know this will sound controversial for a lot of people, is you can't make a mistake. You're learning. I mean, yes, can you make a mistake? there are lines of where you can be hurtful. Absolutely. So we have a lot of parameters of safety checks, but you have to be willing to learn, which means falling down, which means talking about how you fell down so we can learn what happened. If we can take out the shame. So when you're sharing on your podcast, what I love about it is you're modeling for people that that's how we learn in the talking about the processing of what happened and looking at it from the lens of compassion rather than let's just forget that happened and move on and let's put the facade that all is well, right? My house is never dirty. My kids never, we never fight. Me and my husband always get along. Sex is always great. Weight is never an issue. Money just flows. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I had this thought when you were talking because you went through grad school and started working directly at the center. So this has been your orientation since you've been a therapist. So I had this thought. It's like, had we not broken up for 20 years, maybe I wouldn't have this point of view and maybe I would have taken a different trajectory. I mean, we'll never know, but that's the first time that we've talked about this and that I've had that thought, like we ended up having really different experiences because I had years and years and years of therapy with multiple therapists in between. And it helped me. I mean, I really have made tremendous leaps and bounds. And there were some other things, it's like good enough parenting.
Right.
Yeah.
We could talk for hours.
I know.
As you've been working with this podcast from beginning to, it's been, 4 months?
I'm in my 5th month now.
5th month, right?
Yeah.
So in 5 months, what have you learned thus far?
I'm really finding my voice. I honestly felt like I had nothing to say. I had no point of view. I really didn't have a lot of things to offer. And what I'm finding, especially as I have guests on, I'm always really amazed at I know a lot about a lot, or I know some about a lot. And I guess learning how my brain works too, because I've had feedback that we'll have a guest on that listeners don't understand, but they'll say, you did such a great job of recapping. We totally understood when you were able to say, so this is what we're talking about. And before I had a podcast, being someone who has a really rich internal life, there's always stuff going on in my head. I just don't get much of a break from it. When I was a guest on a few podcasts, I had the opportunity to experience myself from kind of outside of myself. And I was really astounded, I'm really articulate. I have a lot of things to say. And I don't think I had that experience of myself because there's just always junk floating around in my head and it doesn't feel very clear and articulate in my head. Having done the podcast, I'm really seeing I'm really articulate and I have a lot to say. And I would have thought I don't have stories to tell. I don't have anything that's interesting. And then a lot of the time I'll be poloing with you about something and you go that's really interesting. And I'll think oh, okay, I could do an episode about that or I can do a bonus episode. So a lot of the content that you've heard as listeners comes because I share stuff with Laura and Laura will go that's pretty interesting. I really feel like I'm kind of growing myself up. I'm having a really new experience of myself and having way more confidence. And I think the part of me that loves connecting, I'm reluctant sometimes to reach out to new people. But because I've got this platform and there are things that I'm passionate about, I've reached out to all kinds of people that I normally wouldn't have. And you don't really reach out to someone and go I like your stuff. Will you be my friend? I mean, we just don't really do that. I mean, you can, but I feel so grateful to have a platform where I'm getting to know people and getting to learn about things and talk with people. And even when I'm having a really bad day and I know I have an interview, it's all I have to do is just show up and talk. And I'm really good at that. So it's been really empowering because I would have told you something very different before I started the podcast.
Right. There was something you said earlier that I thought was really fun when you said you have a very rich internal life. I thought that was really fun because what I just heard you talk about was being able to get out. The podcast has helped you have an experience of yourself outside of yourself and seeing yourself through eyes of love, through eyes of compassion and through eyes of excitement. And you can see what's always been there, but you weren't able to see before. That's a huge shift that I think we're constantly in the work with our clients, or the work we're trying to assist people in being able to see the version of them that we see.
Right.
And the podcast has been a vehicle that's allowed you to see aspects of yourself that you could never see before.
I think internally from the things that I have to do to create the podcast, and externally from the point of being able to listen back to interviews or episodes and go like, wow. Or, you were saying that you had listened to an episode recently, and I thought, I'm kind of curious to listen to that. And so I played an episode that I hadn't listened to, and I'll be like, wow, I asked some really good questions. Not from a place of bragging, but kind of like, I've got some skills there.
Well, the power of what you're talking about is being able to see ourselves authentically, not from the lens of, like in my world, of self-hate, but from the lens of, you would see that quality in anyone else. But generally from our trauma or from our childhoods, we can't see ourselves without that lens of the old stories from childhood. So the power of you being able to, for whatever reason, the podcast allowing you to see yourself authentically, to me, it just is so exciting.
It is. I feel like I get that from you too, though. I mean, I feel like with us reconnecting in the intimacy that we share, emotional intimacy, I feel like I get so much love mirrored back from you that it just encourages me to keep showing up more and more authentically.
Yeah. To me, it's the power of, again, if we could capture the friendship in a template of being able to skill set. It's not just skills, though. It's presence, right? Of really being able to be present, because I feel like I get that from you as well. Again, it feels really magical, that time in our lives to be able to come back together and be really present for another human. And in the presence for each other, I think we're also being present for ourselves, and then able to take that to or with ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. This is totally an aside, and you may not hear this when the episode comes out, but my son is home from college this weekend, so we're in his room recording. The dog is in here because my family's leaving, and I can't leave her outside the door. So she's been up and down and on the bed, and my chair has hit the desk. The chair squeaks. So you may not hear any of this by the time it goes through post-production, but I just feel like I need to acknowledge that if you're hearing some background stuff, it's Gracie, not my grandma, the dog who's on my lap right now.
So the power of naming it, so we can just let it go.
Yep.
Yes. If we move into the challenges, we've talked a lot about the strengths, what being an HSP really brings to your life. What are the challenges?
I think the overwhelm is really hard, and that comes up for me a lot. And every morning when I walk the dog, it's not uncommon for me to use Marco Polo. And that's the time where I usually talk about, like, this is what I'm doing today. And it's sort of a time when I talk about what I want to get accomplished. And that's really been helpful for me, because then it sort of lays a template of what I need to do for the day. Because I'm an extrovert, because I'm very verbal processing really works for me. I do think I want to start doing some journaling and try and get a little bit more internal and to get the chatter to settle down a little bit. I think the scales have tipped a little bit where I'm looking for a lot of external validation. I probably need to get a little bit more quiet and go inward. But the overwhelm, and then it's interesting, like with my kids being home this weekend, my husband went out with my son this morning. They were gone for a couple of hours. They came home. They went to a ball game. They came home, and then they're going to a goals game tonight. And my plan was to go to the ball game with them, but I just wasn't feeling well. And it brought up that old feeling of like, I can't do anything, and I get too tired, and, I get headaches, and I had to let it go, but I felt bad, and I had that mom guilt. Like, my son is home from college, and he's playing on this baseball team, and this is his team, and I want to support him, and I just wasn't feeling well. So being able to have grace for myself when I'm not able to do the things that other people can, and it's really easy for me to compare myself to my husband, who's like the Energizer Bunny and can go, 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 and on the weekends I'll go like, do you want to go out and do something? I'm like, nope.
So the challenge being that it can seem as if there's the reservoir of energy is less.
Yeah.
And when comparison happens, it really highlights like it being a deficit rather than that's just the energy you have. Like,
right.
It's not. So the narrative will be, we should be more like them versus this is just the energy you have.
Yep. For the most part, I feel that way. And It is harder when there's more things going on and I'm limited in what I'm able to do. And I hear from my clients that's a huge thing, especially when they have partners that are people that are more like my husband that want to do a lot, that they have that feeling of what the F is wrong with me.
Right.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you say that often with couples, we tend to choose a partner who has a corresponding trait? So if someone's really high energy, they often will choose a partner who has lower energy.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know that the things that I love about my husband are also the things that drive me totally up the wall. And if he changed, then he wouldn't be my husband.
Right.
He'd be a constantly changing person to fit my whims. Like that doesn't work.
Right. Right. I'm curious how you're going to answer this question now because you've talked a lot about your association with it, but tell me about your relationship with play.
I like play now. I feel like part of it is, there are a couple things. There's a part of me that feels really inhibited. And as I've allowed myself to have my feelings, and a lot of that is sad feelings, intense feelings, angry feelings, it's really loosened me up. And I feel like in some ways I've gotten much less inhibited. And my phrase is often happy dance, that I'll reach out to somebody or I get something or something excited, like I want to do my happy dance. And that's about letting that inhibition go. And I've been doing more Zentangle and also honoring that play for me looks different. And I just shared in an episode that I did that I think our concept of play is based on an extroverted ideal, that it's active, it's physical, and it's engaging with other people doing a very active thing. And I think for many of us, using our minds, using problem solving, being creative, that those are ways that our mind is stimulated. And that's really exciting to us.
Right. So a very limited definition of play.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it was fun with my kids home for the weekend. My son's girlfriend was over last night and she's like, let's play categories. And over the holidays when the kids were home, we played categories. So it was really nice. We sat around the table with my 2 grown boys and one of their girlfriends and my husband, and we played categories and we laughed and had a great time. And I really see that as being a byproduct of the podcast, because over the holidays, I got in touch with we don't play board games anymore. I love playing games. And one of my sons said, let's play one, let's get one out now and play it. So I really do see that doing this podcast, and like I said, I've been taking a bunch of Zentangle classes and finding ways to be creative aside from the podcast itself is very creative, coming up with ideas and topics and guests and cover art. And that stimulates my brain, which I love. I think I've said this before. I feel like I'm a dog that you need to give me a really good bone, something to keep me entertained. Otherwise, I'm going to dig holes in your backyard and chew up your furniture. Mm. It's kind of like that's what my mind needs, I guess, until I learn how to quiet it.
Well, and the podcast is so perfect because I can remember you talking about how fun the editing process was. And I just remember kind of having a visceral jaw drop, really? Cool. Glad that's fun for you. I really saw you that not loosen up as you began to do your podcast and begin to redefine what play was for you rather than have the definition be put upon you.
Right. And it seems like a lot of the guests struggle with that too. And then we discovered that they do play. It's just not what we would think of play.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's redefining what play means.
For you. We get to decide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Versus having the television version of play.
Right.
Or whatever that was decided by your family of origin or your culture or, Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
As you've gone about your life and since you've integrated and came into a knowing relationship with HSP, can you remember someone or something specific that someone said about being an HSP that's been hurtful or insensitive or difficult?
I knew you were going to ask me this and I really couldn't, but it's interesting that the other day I walked by somebody's house that we're going to call Negative Nelly. I haven't let go of this. It was really interesting that, we said hello and exchanged pleasantries. And this person said oh, were you bored today because you were posting stuff on social media? It didn't occur to me in the moment that was it was kind of a mean, hurtful thing to say. It was not coming from a place of love and support. And it wasn't until later on that I realized, but I did say, no, I was posting stuff from my podcast. I'm getting close to hitting 10,000 downloads and I'm really excited and I'm promoting it. And I moved on, and it wasn't until I was toward the end of the walk that And I think this happens to us very frequently, that we have exchanges with people that are hurtful and mean and we don't realize it in the moment. I was grateful that I stood up for myself, even though I was kind of clueless to what was going on in the moment. But I've been, every time I walk by this person's house, like, I'm just like, today I made a conscious choice. I'm not going to engage anymore. I'm just not, because it felt like it was mean. It felt like it was hurtful. It was unkind. And I'm ruminating.
You know what I see out of that too, though, is that it didn't register to you in the moment, and I'm projecting all over you, is because you're so dialed into yourself and feel so good about how you are with this, that her negativity or her hurtfulness didn't land.
Yeah.
So, because, when someone says something mean to us and we don't have any hangups about it, it doesn't hook.
Yeah.
It's only when we have some hangups that their meanness can hook us, and then we engage. And so it's like, it's curious that it's not until later that then the mind starts ruminating that it found something to be upset about with it. Superpowers, your tagline. I love your tagline. Can you say it for me? For us?
Sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower.
Right. So tell us about the superpowers of being an HSP.
In general or mine?
Yours.
Because I'd rather talk about me.
Wait, can I tell a story about that? Because one of the things I've loved about is that, to me, again, that being able to name that we like to talk about ourselves, like especially as therapists or probably highly sensitives, is we can be very good at attuning into others that we get neglected and there's not enough space for us. So one of the things I love about our friendship is there's space for that. And so you'll joke, and there's joking when it's, what's the word when people talk about themselves, but it's meanly?
Like sarcastically?
Self-deprecating. And you don't do it in a self-deprecating way. It's truly, I think, in a very loving, carving out space way for yourself when you talk about that. And I feel like it's hard to highlight and put words to, but I think it's also important to create a space to really name and differentiate the difference between when we go underground and try and get our needs met and when we just claim it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we all have, I mean, for me, I know this is a young thing to say, but it's like, I want to be the baby. I want it to be all about me. I want to be taken care of. I want to be nurtured. I want the whole world to be about me. Do I act on that? No. The way that I show up in my relationships is incredibly compassionate and supportive. And at the same time, I can still have that fantasy of like, I want it to be all about me. And I think that what you're saying is because I allow that to be, I don't have to try and, I think if I wasn't okay with that and couldn't name it, I'd be trying to snatch pieces all the time. Or you would say something and I would try and snatch it away from you.
Yes.
And I know people that they say, how are you? And you say something and then the next thing you know, they're talking about themselves. They don't even have the ability to acknowledge what you said or what's going on with you because they just have that insatiable need to get their own needs met. And they can't talk about it. So then you feel like they're kind of energy vampires.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to the superpower, what are your superpowers?
I have a wicked sense of humor.
Yes, you do.
And I think I have a really great ability that when things are very tough and I'm having a hard time, I'm usually able to find humor in it. And that just makes things so much easier for me. I don't know. I am incredibly compassionate. I feel things deeply. I don't know if it's a function of just getting older. I'm 55, so I kind of just don't care a whole bunch these days. And so I really have given myself permission, like if I'm mad or frustrated or disappointed, that I really allow myself to have those feelings. And then I kind of move through, and I think I'd received so many messages about like, you can't let things go, or you're feeling too much, or you're too depressing to be around. I've lost a couple of relationships because people said like, you're too depressing to be around. Maybe I was more depressed back then. And the core of who I am is always the same. There may be things going on around it, and I think that really had more to do with other people and where they were at, and I just mirrored and reflected more than they felt comfortable with.
And I would like to clarify the difference between feeling your feelings and acting them out. I think people confuse those often. They confuse acting out their feelings with feeling them. And my experience of you is that you don't act them. I mean, I'm sure you have your mess ups and all of that, but that you're pretty darn good at being able to name your feelings and feel them rather than deny them. And then you feel them vicariously through whatever method of behavior that is.
I think that's when it comes out sideways, when we say things that are unkind or we're sarcastic or we slam or, like we slam things around or we stomp around. Like, I think that's where that negativity comes from.
Right.
As opposed to just saying like, I'm feeling really angry. I'm feeling like this really made me upset. This made me feel really frustrated.
Right. And there can be space for behavior when owning it, and so it's not that there isn't room for both. It's how we show up around the feelings. So I think it's just really important. And what I would love listeners to hear is it's also a learning curve. When you've learned been taught to deny your feelings for so long, you can't just read a book or listen to a podcast or know that you need to feel them. You have to learn how to feel them. So there's and so having safe relationships to practice doing that, because in the beginning, there's a lot of repair work when you're having to go back and say, gosh, sorry, I did or said, or, did that because I was trying to feel my feelings and I didn't know how. And so I ended up saying something mean or insensitive.
Right. I can remember once I learned about how much people pleasing I'd done and how much I didn't say no, that all of a sudden I was angry all the time and all I wanted to do was say no. It's like, now I have a new tool and my new tool is no and anger.
Yes.
So
if you could not be an HSP, but it would mean losing all of the attributes around it, would you want to not be an HSP?
I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be me. Nope. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Loving it.
That would be sad. Yeah. What would you tell your younger self about being an HSP?
I don't think it's even about being an HSP. I've been taking a little bit of time since I did the episode with Kelly Covert. I think it's episode 21. I wake up a lot in the middle of the night, and if my phone is with me, I go on social media, and I've really been trying to not do that. And so I've been tuning in and asking kind of myself, like, what is it that you need? And what keeps coming up is like, that I'm loved, that I'm okay, and that I'm enough. I think that I have so much wounding around that, about feeling like who I am is really okay, that I'm enough, and that I'm totally loved and worthy for who I am. So I think that's what I would want my younger self to know.
Those powerful reassurances that there are three of them, and I'm missing one. You are, say them again.
That you are loved, you're enough. I don't know what the third one is. When I edit it, I'll remember.
Right. That powerful reassurance of you are loved, you are enough.
Yeah.
And often when we learn to sit with ourselves, we find out what are those core reassurances that we need to hear.
Yeah.
Because they will touch us deeply and they'll bring tears to our eyes. That's when or it'll bring up resistance. That's when we know, we've touched on something that we need to hear. So it's that lovely backdoor into what do we need to hear now, by thinking what would we want to tell that younger self. I just love that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to let her know that she's totally okay exactly how she is, and that she's not too much, and that she's lovable and precious. Yeah. I didn't get enough of that mirrored when I was growing up. Not for any fault. My mom was doing the best she could. We've done healing, but yeah, that's definitely what I needed to hear then, and it's what I need to work on now for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And anything about being HSP that I maybe didn't ask, or that has come up, or, that last thoughts that you're thinking, no, I really want to talk about this, or leave the listeners with something around that?
I know I talk about this a lot, but I think so many of us have wounding from childhood, and it's that wounding with the overlay of being an HSP, and then people end up hating the traits of being an HSP. And I really think that it's about the wounding, and when we can work on those wounds and get them taken care of, then we can really embrace the traits of being an HSP. And it does come with challenges. And I feel like, I don't know, I've just had some moments of pure bliss and joy this week from very, very minor things. And I really think that it's because of my ability to express myself and to have that sense of joy and wonder and connection. Like my boys came home this weekend, and one of my boys I haven't seen since Christmas, and the other one was home a couple weekends ago. But I texted both of them and I said, like, I'm going to hug you until you push me away and tell me to stop it. Because like I really miss him, and to be able to freely express my sense of love for them, it's like it just creates a sense of connection. And the way one of my sons responded, like he responded really positively to that. And it just made me feel loved. And today he was sitting eating his lunch, and I came up from behind and I was hugging him and rubbing his chest. And he made some kind of reference of like, yeah, it's starting to bug me. And I'm like, good. And that's a way of embracing my need to have closeness and connection with my boys. I mean, they're young men and they're out and independent, and to acknowledge that need that I have for connection and how much I love them and to express that freely. That's where I get these, little bursts of just bliss and connection. And if I wasn't in touch with my feelings or trying to pretend like, I'm the strong mom, I don't want to say this to my kids, I'd be missing out on these moments of bliss.
And the thing I want to add to that is, watching you this last year and a half with your boys is you've also developed relationships where you've taught them to be able to say, this bugs me, enough, stop, right? So it's not a one-sided communication. So that place of you've learned to give yourself freedom to communicate while also modeling and teaching them to communicate as well.
A lot of permission giving. I mean, even tonight with having an interview in my son's room and saying, hey, I have an interview at 4:30 and I know you're coming home. Can we work something out? I mean, a tremendous amount of permission giving because this is his space. And even talking to them about some of the things after doing the episode on childhood emotional neglect and saying, hey, I'm seeing some areas where I struggle and I didn't teach you guys this stuff. So if you need to come back and talk to me about it, I'm totally fine with that. If you want some help, I just feel like there's been such a gift of having really open communication and having spaciousness for them to be able to share what goes on with them and for me to be able to share what goes on with me. I feel like now that they're 18, I feel like I'm starting to get this parenting thing nailed down just a little bit.
Right. Well, and just beauty, to me, those are two more superpowers that we can add to that list of that desire for depth. You want it for not just for yourself, but for them as well. It's not just focused on your needs of the relationship, but you want that for them. So you give them just as much ample space to communicate and have boundaries or make requests and it really creates for a beautiful relationship.
Yeah. And I just want to say that we do have our challenges and struggles and there are things that go on, but because of privacy issues, I don't share everything. So I really want to be mindful that I'm very transparent and very open with you, the listener. And there are certain things that I don't share. So I think I always have this fear of I don't want to be idealized. I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I don't want to be made into something that I'm not, because I have stuff that I struggle with on a daily basis. Some things I do really well. Other things I really struggle with. I'm going to share with you the things that I have permission to share with you about my family. And there's some stuff I don't share with you because it's just private family stuff. We're all humans.
That was exactly my phrase is, welcome to being human.
Yeah.
Human.
Yeah, exactly.
This was fun.
I know. This was so much fun. Thank you.
So much fun and to be continued.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey again. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really had so much fun recording it. Wanted to talk a little bit about when Laura asks if I could go back and tell my younger self something, and what came up for me, and I got a little tearful, was talking about I would want to let my younger self know that I was loved, that I'm okay, and that I'm enough. And it's not unusual after I record an episode that whatever's going on, it kind of comes up in my face in the next couple of weeks. And what happened this past week was I've been really hustling and doing a lot for my business, for the podcast, doing a lot of creative work. And Laura and I were talking about it, and it just felt like I wasn't doing enough. And she reflected to me how much I was doing, and I still had that feeling of not enough, which is kind of that perfectionism. No matter what I do, it just never feels like I'm enough. What I realized is it's because internally that feeling of not being okay, not being enough, not being lovable had surfaced. And when I don't deal with the feelings around the not enoughness, it comes out externally. So no matter what I do externally doesn't feel like it's enough because I don't feel like I'm enough. So it really gave me an opportunity this week to look at that and to really work on the messages that I'm giving myself, looking at how I can use busyness and doing as a way to try and compensate to feel like I'm enough and that I'm doing enough, where it's really about knowing that I have value and worth because I live and breathe. And what I would love to offer to you is that you are enough. You matter. You are loved. You're okay. That you don't have to do anything at all to have value and worth and meaning. And I think we get so caught up today in our busyness and our striving and our doing that we really forget those messages. So I really want you to hear, you are loved. You matter. You make a difference. You're okay. You have value and worth no matter what you do. Changing gears. If any of this resonates with you, if you're struggling with your relationships, with being a highly sensitive person, not knowing the gifts that you have, trying to figure out how to create more peace and calm in your life, trying to get a lifestyle that works for you, work relationships, personal issues. I work with people online in California. You can reach out to me at patriciayoung.lcsw.com. All of my contact information is there. Love to get your feedback about this episode. If you have any questions, comments, things that you would love to hear on the podcast. And we have an amazing Facebook group called Unapologetically Sensitive. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.